tariff is all over the news again. In February 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump is tariffs on imports again. Not just on China, which, yeah, obvious, but also on Mexico and even U.S. ally, Japan, and South Korea. So what's really going on? You've probably heard the word tariff so many times, but what does it mean? What exactly is a tariff? How do they work? Do tariffs actually work? And most important, tariffs affect you and your daily life. Well, in this video, we will cover everything you need to know about tariffs. So, Section 1. What is a tariff? Well, tariff is a tax that a government places on products coming. Sounds weird, huh? Why would they do that? So, for example, let's say the U.S. can produce its own bread and then China can somehow produce and sell the exact same bread with similar quality for older and sell it to the U.S. Of course, most Americans now prefer the Chinese bread as it's cheaper and similar. But a problem for U.S. bakeries because they can't compete with that lower price. So in order to protect and support U.S., the U.S. government puts tariffs on Chinese bread. Let's say the tariff is $3. Now, when that $1 comes into the U.S., it gets an extra $3 tax, making it cost $4. Now, there's still $3, while the Chinese bread is $4 because of the tariff. So most Americans are more likely for local U.S. bread. So simply put, governments charge tariffs to make foreign products more expensive than local. So the local products now look more attractive to buyers because they are the cheaper option. Now you already. So let's go to the next section. Section 2. Types of tariffs. Not all tariffs work the same, have different ways to apply them. Here are two types of tariffs. The first type is a specific tariff. Tariff is a fixed fee on a product, regardless of its price. For example, let's say the U.S. puts a $3 loaf of bread for every imported bread that comes from other countries. Now, if an imported loaf of bread is $2, then adding the $3 tariff would make it $5. If the bread cost $100 per fixed $3 tariff still applies, making the total price $103. No matter high or low, the tariff remains the same fixed amount. The second type is an ad valorem tariff. Valorem tariff is just a fancy name for a percentage-based tariff. So the tariff is based on percentage of the. For example, the government might say, okay, we're adding a 20% tariff on imported bread. Bread originally cost $10, then the 20% tariff of $10 is $2. So adding a tariff makes the final price $12. If the bread is $100, then the 20% tariff of which is $20. So the final bread price would be $120. Now you might have heard 100% or 200% tariffs. Well, how does that work? Well, a 100% tariff means bread originally costs $10. A 100% tariff of $10 is $10. The $10 tariff to the original $10 price makes the total $20. A 200% tariff, original price is $10, then 200% of $10 is $20. Add this $20 tariff to $10 price, making it $30 as the final price. So, simply put, the higher the tariff. Well, most of tariffs that you've heard on the news or in daily life are mostly ad valorem tariffs because it's more flexible. Cheap goods get cheap tariff. Expensive goods get expensive tariff. Rather than tariffs with a fixed amount for all goods. So, countries use tariffs as a tax to control. But other than tariffs, they can use other trade barriers, which restrict trade without adding taxes. Examples include import quotas, where a country sets a limit on how much product can be imported, or regulations, making it harder for foreign products to enter. But unlike tariffs, other trade barriers don't a tax. They simply set limits or make it harder for foreign goods to enter. but we'll stay focused on that's our main topic. Now, let's get into whether tariffs are good or bad. Section 3. Pros and cons of. After understanding tariffs, you might still be confused about whether it's good or bad, because it seems like it's somewhere. Well, the answer is, it depends. Tariffs don't always have a clear-cut outcome because their impact varies. Now, let's talk first about some advantages of tariffs. The first advantage is to protect local. If you ask the government why they impose tariffs, their classic answer is to protect local or domestic businesses. That's kind of true. Without tariffs, super cheap imports can flood the market, killing local industries. For example, Harley-Davidson, which once had a 100% market share of heavy motorcycles, saw it to just 15% as Japanese brands like Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki took cheaper, high-quality bikes. In 1983, Harley-Davidson asked the U.S. government to help by imposing a 5% tariff on imported heavy motorcycles. This gave the company time to restructure, improve quality. By 1987, Harley-Davidson had recovered and even requested the removal of tariffs, but now compete on their own. The second advantage is to increase government revenue. Tariffs are basically and like all taxes, they bring money to the government. Every time an imported product gets hit with a tariff, it goes straight to the government's pocket. The government can then use it for infrastructure, public services, or even boosting at least in theory, yeah. The third advantage is to protect national interest. Tariffs as a negotiation tool. For example, the U.S. has pressured Mexico with tariffs to push for stricter immigration controls. If Mexico refuses, then the tariffs stay in place. If they agree, then tariffs may be halted. Tariffs push companies to move production back locally. For example, the U.S. imposed tariffs on countries like China. U.S. companies would move production back home, open new factories, and create jobs in the United States. This backfired as companies moved to other low-cost countries that were not affected by tariffs, like Vietnam. So tariffs can protect jobs and industries, but they also have lots of disadvantages. And that's why lots of people mean when the government imposes tariffs. So, what are the disadvantages? The first disadvantage is higher costs. This is actually what most people worry about. For example, the Mexican bakery needs $1 in order, and they sell it for $2 to American customers, which means they make $1 profit. Now, the U.S. let's say $2 tariffs to all Mexican bread. The Mexican bakery needs to pay those $2 tariffs in order to get their bread into the U.S. market. Since they only sell $2 per bread, they can't bear all, so they raise the price to $4 so they can still maintain $1 profit. Who is paying? The American consumers who buy that Mexican bread. The second disadvantage is hurting local businesses on imports. Continuing from the previous example, there's an American sandwich shop that buys Mexican bread and help making their sandwich also cheap. Now that the Mexican bread costs $4 per loaf, if the shop keeps the same, it will lose money. So the shop must raise its sandwich prices, which could drive away profits. So consumers pay higher prices, and businesses that rely on imports struggle to survive. Third disadvantage is hurting international relations. When one country imposes tariffs, the other country sees it as and thinks, they're making things harder for us, so why should we make things easy for them? If the other country is imposing tariffs in return, this is called a reciprocal tariff. If both countries continue to raise tariffs and to more products, the situation can escalate into a trade war. This worsens relations and makes countries to trust and cooperate with each other. Now you've understood the advantages and disadvantages of tariffs. And you might ask, tariffs really work? Well, let's talk about it in the next section. Section 4. Do tariffs work? Sometimes they work, but most of the time they don't work as example. Let's say they're named Cookie Land and Pie Land. Cookie Land was famous for its delicious chocolate chip cookies, while Pie Land had the best pies in the world. People in Cookie Land loved Pie Land's pies, and people in Pie Land loved cookies. They traded happily, and everyone was happy. One day, the Cookie Land government noticed that many people from Pie Land, local pie makers in Cookie Land, started complaining, saying they couldn't compete because pie land was cheaper and better. In response, the Cookie Land government decided to place a tariff on imported pies. Pie Land's pies more expensive, and the government hoped this would encourage people to buy local pies instead. And consumers in Cookie Land started buying the cheaper local pies. But loyal customers who preferred Pie Land's pies pay more. This helped the local pie industry in Cookie Land thrive. But some of them started to get lazy, realized they had no real competition. With less competition from Pie Land, some pie makers in Cookie Land had the need to improve. They could keep selling their pies even if the quality wasn't great, because customers had cafes in Cookie Land that relied on Pie Land's pies for their desserts also struggled as costs. They either had to raise prices or use lower quality local pies. Pie Land saw that its pie exiting customers and thought, if Cookie Land won't let us make money there, why should we let them make money here? In return, Pie Land placed a reciprocal tariff on Cookie Land's cookies, making them more expensive as well. Now, in Cookie Land started suffering too, losing sales in Pie Land. Meanwhile, bakeries in Pie Land that cookies for their cakes also struggled with similar condition. They either had to raise prices or use lower qualities, both of which led to losing customers. If Cookie Land retaliated by adding more tariffs and then a trade war would officially begin. Those relying on imported ingredients faced higher costs, lost customers because their products became too expensive in foreign markets. Prices kept rising, fewer people could afford the products that they loved. Without competition from Cookie Land, some of Pie Land's cookie makers had no reason to improve. They got lazy, and their cookies remained low quality. So tariffs might be a good idea at first, but they often backfire. They hurt businesses, consumers, and innovation, and with both sides losing. Now, stop with the story. Let's look at some real-world examples. Real-life examples. Now, tariffs sound like a super bad idea. So why do governments still consider them? Many tariffs fail, some actually work. A real-life example of successful tariffs is South Korea's strategy, its automobile industry in the 1960s and 1970s. Local companies like Hyundai and Kia struggled foreign brands. So, South Korea imposed high tariffs on imported cars to protect the local brands. Becoming lazy, these tariffs pushed local companies to innovate and improve their technology. Additionally, South Korea helped avoid retaliation. Plus, they got lucky, as the Korean car market was still small. So, importing countries didn't see it as a serious threat yet. This combination of innovation and smart diplomacy allowed tariffs to work, enabling Hyundai and Kia to compete successfully on the international market. Clear example of tariffs backfiring was the U.S. China trade war, which began in 2018. During term, he saw that the U.S. was importing far more from China than it was exporting, leading to a huge trade deficit. In response, he imposed tariffs on Chinese imports to reduce the deficit. However, China retaliated with exports, particularly agricultural products. This hurt Chinese companies by making their exports to the expensive, affecting around $350 billion worth of goods between 2018 and 2000. At the same time, U.S. consumers who relied on China imports had to pay higher prices too. U.S. farmers faced massive losses as China imposed reciprocal tariffs on agricultural products. Analytics, the trade war led to an estimated loss of 300,000 jobs and reduced real GDP in 3%. So, who's the winner of this trade war? The winner is Vietnam. Yeah. As countries out of China to avoid tariffs, many relocated their factories to Vietnam, significantly boosting its exports. In the end, both U.S. and China lost lots of money, while Vietnam got tons of nowhere. So, in conclusion, tariffs can be useful in some cases, such as helping local industries grossing government revenue and protecting national interests. But they can also lead to higher costs and prices and unintended economic consequences. So, governments must use tariffs wisely to ensure they rather than harm it. If you want me to make other videos explaining these topics, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.